probably a little uncertain about the value returning. We'll go over that again, okay? We discussed arguments. I want to go into that in depth today so that you understand how to use arguments back and forth between functions. And we'll talk about what's a formal argument, what's an actual argument, and how they work. And then the one tricky thing, I believe, with functions is pass by value, pass by reference. So I'm going to start introducing that today. We'll have a lab on that tomorrow, and then you'll be able to digest that, and we'll go over it again on Thursday. Scope has to do with what? Where variables are visible. So the good thing about scope, we only have two different scopes. Global, which means everywhere in the program. We pretty much avoid global in programming. And local, which is within a function. We are calling these functions or procedures. In Java next semester, you'll call these methods. Most of the ideas that we're talking about apply across languages. Okay? So it's not a C specific, but something that you're going to use no matter what language you do. So this is an example of a void function. The two things to remember when using a void function is that this function doesn't have to return anything. It may or may not have arguments, which we're going to look at today. When you call a void function, you simply give the name followed by a semicolon, and that jumps to the void function. If I was going to do a hierarchy chart for this, how many blocks would I have in it? Just two. One that says do prop 1 and some other thing that describes which this program does, which doesn't do much, so it'll be a little tricky. But does everybody understand that when I call a function, the control transfers down here, finishes the whole function, then comes back to the line afterwards, right? That's a basic. Everybody understands that, okay? So here's a hierarchy chart. We have 4 functions. One is main. Demo A, demo also goes into these 3 is the name of the function, and then we just give a different name for the main guy because it's kind of dumb to put main there. So give a meaningful name so you can look at this hierarchy chart and know what the program does. The other kind of thing that we're doing is we're using verbs to indicate a void function. We can't guarantee that's what's going to happen for the rest of our life. Okay, so we're going to use that hierarchy chart at the beginning. As soon as we start to do our design, we're going to use our hierarchy chart, and then we're going to construct the code for each one. Main first. Main should generally always have a loop, kind of a good rule of thumb to go by. And then each other block in the hierarchy chart, you construct the code and test the code for. We're kind of moving away from IPOs because our programs have gotten pretty complex, right? Okay? So, this is an example of using an argument. All right? When I create an argument inside a function, this is called a formal argument. Okay? This is important to understand because we're going to use this in a second when we start to talk about pass by value, pass by reference. So when I declare an argument inside a function, I call that the formal argument. I hate to memorize, so the way I remember is I'm formally declaring the argument. I'm giving it a type and I'm giving it a name, just like I do when I regularly declare a variable. Does that make sense? Formally declaring the argument within the function. Okay? Now this argument is local to the function, meaning what? What do I mean when I say the argument is local to the function? It can only be seen there. So num lines can be seen from the beginning of print lines to the end of print lines. Local, visible. That's where it's visible, within that function. So an argument is local, and this is an actual local variable that is defined within that function as well. Are there any questions about what I mean by a local variable declared within a function? Okay. Now, how many arguments could I put in this line? 0, 1, multiple, right? As many as I need. Does that make sense? Each one must be declared followed by a comma. So when I call this guy, when I call print lines, what do I need to send to print lines? If I call print lines, how do I call it? It's void, so I just give the name. So what can go inside here? What is print lines waiting for? Everybody knows. What goes inside what is that waiting for? What is print lines waiting for inside the argument list? Number of lines. Number of lines, but even more specifically, it's waiting for an integer. That's really all it cares about. You send me an integer, okay? And it will use it as an line. So I have a couple different options. One is to actually put an integer there. Well, this guy is called the formal argument. Remember? Formal argument. This guy is called the actual argument. Actual argument is sent to the formal argument. You with me? Okay. Now, that's one way of passing an integer. What's another way of passing an integer? Does it have to be a constant or a number? What else could it be? A variable. So long as the variable is what? Integer. And it has to have a value. So, whatever. Let's say I did a Cn of x or something like that. So the only thing that matters when I call print lines is that I send in an integer. Does that make sense? Either a known integer or something I've read a value into, but I'm going to pass that integer into print line. Formal argument is where I declare it. Actual is where I send it. You with me? Okay.
Formal is what?
This is formal, where I formally declare it. The other guy is